at which the membrane drifts up towards threshold, and it causes them to drift up towards threshold at a slower rate, causing your heart rate to go down. We'll talk about this in more detail later. Anyways, for all of you, every one of you in here, the electrical activity of the heart begins here in the right atrium. Now, when these cells depolarize, that then leads to depolarization of the right atrium and the left atrium. So if you sit there and think about this and just try to develop a list or sequence, we would sit there and say number one would be depolarization of the SA node. Number two, depolarization of the right and left atrium. There's another node in the heart, and all of you should have learned this. Where's that other node, and what's the name of this other node in the heart?
AV node.
Say it louder. That's correct, the AV node. I'm going to show the AV node located here between the atrium and the ventricles. So we're going to label this as the AV node. You guys will know that AV node stands for atrioventricular node. And it turns out that the SA node and the AV node are connected to one another. So that's why I'm showing this by that blue line that I've just put here. And this connection, we're going to refer to this as the inter meaning between internodal pathway. So you notice I've got two twos here. So as the left and the right atriums are depolarizing, so is the internodal pathway as well. So I'm just going to put internodal pathway depolarization. Coming off of the AV node, there is a conduction system that has two branches in it. So collectively, where I'm showing these two blue lines, this is a conduction system. And this is known as the bundle. Why bundle? Because there's two branches here. The bundle of His, H-I-S. Now I could come up with some stupid jokes like women don't have this. Or in women it's called the bundle of hers. The reason it's called the bundle of His is because there was a very famous Italian anatomist who discovered this set of nerve tracts running through the septum, and his last name happened to be H-I-S. So in honor of his discovery, they named this the bundle of His. So the bundle of His conducts electrical activity very rapidly down along the septum. there's what's referred to as a right bundle branch and a left bundle branch. So this branch we refer to as the right bundle branch, and the one to the left we call the left bundle branch. I'm just going to put LBB there. And then extending off of the left and right bundle branch are so-called Purkinje fibers. And it's the Purkinje fibers that come along and stimulate the muscle cells of the left and the right ventricle. So this is the Purkinje fibers. So coming back to this little shopping list that we have here, we've got the internodal pathway depolarization. That then leads to the depolarization of the AV node. Which then leads to depolarization of the bundle of His. That then leads to depolarization of Purkinje fibers, which then leads to depolarization of the ventricles. And remember, the heart is a muscle. So now I need you guys to step back 2 weeks ago. And when we start talking about muscles, there are 4 physiological steps you need to think about. What are those 4 on this page? Excitation. Excitation, there's excitation, that's number 1. Excitation, contraction coupling, that's DUA. Contraction, yeah, contraction number 3. And then relaxation. So as you guys are thinking about the performance of the heart, you need to be thinking about those 4 events. And that whole story applies in this model. So we've got excitation, step number 1. Here's the excitation phenomena. It's the ventricles, and especially the left ventricle, that's responsible for keeping every cell in your body alive. So, I'm going to talk about the left ventricle. That's where the focus is going to be. So as I'm talking about the heart and how it performs, my focus is always going to be on the left ventricle. And we're going to refer to the muscle cells as ventricular cardiac, so ventricular cardiac myocytes. Oh no, that seems very descriptive to me. Cardiac myocyte, you guys would tell me a cardiac myocyte, that's a muscle cell of the heart. What is a ventricular cardiac myocyte? It's a muscle cell of the heart that's in a ventricle. What is an atrial cardiac myocyte? It's a muscle cell that we would find in the atrium. Everybody with me on that? Adjective, ventricular, cardiac, and adjective, noun, myocyte, right? Ventricular cardiac myocyte. Is everybody with me on that? You got that? Okay, so that's our conduction system. So now I want to transition from those and talk about the cardiac cycle. So if you sit there and think about the performance of the left ventricle has to fill up with blood. And then it has to pump that blood out. And then it has to relax and fill up again with blood. And then it has to contract and pump blood out. And then it has to relax again and fill up with blood. And this happens over and over and over throughout the course of your lifetime, about 6 billion times. Interestingly enough, as it turns out, across mammals, speaking very broadly, but across all mammals, the average number of heartbeats per lifetime is about 6 billion. That's kind of interesting. So if you sit there and think about a little mouse, about 6 billion heartbeats in its lifetime. Think about a human, about 6 billion beats in a lifetime. An elephant, same thing. So it's very curious that across this broad spectrum of large, small mammals, that the number of heartbeats during a lifetime is about the same. It makes you think, hey, the biology, there's something about the biology that's very similar. It's just that the small animals are living on a faster timeline than we are. Their metabolic rates are much higher than ours. So here's our